That is a point that, in fact, Najam Sethi answered specifically. He said it was a one-off gesture, not a precedent that Pakistan was setting when Mr. Nawaz Sharif agreed not to meet Hurraiyat in May. So I won't go back. I want to bring in Krishna. Let me bring in Krishna Srinivasan before I go back to Salman Khurshid and to Pakistan. Mr. Srinivasan, I want to put the same point to you. You see, you're arguing that Mr. Modi is decisively different. A new era has begun with him, and Pakistan failed to appreciate that. On the other hand, the Pakistanis can turn around and say Mr. Modi came to pass saying explicitly that he wanted to go back to the sort of relationship Mr. Vajpayee had. He cited Mr. Vajpayee's foreign policy as something that he would be aspiring to follow. And then there were those exchange of letters, the exchanges of shawls, right? Did the Pakistanis get led up the garden path?
No, I can't believe that. Again, I reiterate, I can't believe that Islamabad did not know the consequences of their High Commissioner meeting the Hurraiyat. I just can't believe this. It would seem to me completely incredible that they didn't think that there would be consequences arising from this action. But I'd like to make another point to you, if I may, that I think that we're thinking of this postponement or cancellation of this round of Foreign Secretary talks next week as a great catastrophe. I don't actually see it as that. I think that if you want to really move forward in the relationship, there has to be a different structure altogether to create that kind of environment.
And so in a sense, this is an opportunity for the new architecture. You're saying this is an opportunity for a new architecture.
The Foreign Secretary of India is a very good friend of mine. I have great respect and admiration for her. But I do not believe, honestly, that the relationship between the two countries can be built bottom upwards. I think it has to be top downwards. And I think you need a different kind of engagement between the two countries.
Well, I'll stop you there. I'll stop you there because what sort of engagement we need first needs to be preceded by the question whether the two men at the top actually will be able to meet again. I'm going to put that first to Mr. Najam Sethi and then to Salman Khurshid. After this snub and setback to Nawaz Sharif, after the clear damage it will have done him when he's already embattled and weakened, do you think he will be willing to meet with Mr. Modi? Do you think there's any likelihood of either party wanting to meet each other at the UN as they're supposed to meet in September? Or is that now clearly off the cards?
Well, clearly this is going to become an issue again. There will be a lot of people in Pakistan saying that the Indians have spurned you yet again. They've been petty, they've been mean, and all the rest of it. You know the usual accusations which the opposition throws. So that will happen, and I think the Prime Minister will have to think very carefully in terms of how he wants to now move forward. Let me just tell you one small thing. You know, I had said this on a program with you earlier, when the Prime Minister of Pakistan went to the ceremony. At that time, the view in the military circles was that he ought to attend the ceremony and the dinner and come back the same night. He ought not to meet the Indian Prime Minister the following day for a tete-a-tete. And the reason given was that the tete-a-tete would be unstructured and it could lead to misunderstandings. And but the Prime Minister of Pakistan said, no, I will do it because I want to go the extra mile. Now it turns out that that little extra mile has really not gone anywhere. In fact, it's blown up in his face. Because of this little thing, which is quite unprecedented. A mountain has been made out of a molehill. And now the two sides are going to be back to square one. They will have to work their way around this in some way or the other so that they can get back on track. I think at the very least, this is a setback.
Najam Sethi, before we come to talk about how they work their way around this, I want to put a pointed question to you about where this leaves Nawaz Sharif. Is he embarrassed, A, in the eyes of the press, B, in the eyes of the army who were skeptical, and very possibly also in the eyes of his own party, who feel at a time when in fact they have domestic political problems, a new problem has been added?
Yes, you see, there were three issues, major issues on which the military had a problem with Nawaz Sharif's policy formulations. One was the pace and the unstructured manner in which he wanted to move forward to redress issues with India. And I think there's a serious setback there. But he's currently, facing all sorts of other problems as well. So my sense is that September will be very difficult. He has to survive this generally internal political problem right now before he's able to make any major moves He is certainly going to be thinking many times over in terms of how to restore this dialogue in September.
Salman Khurshid, we've ended up with a situation where a Prime Minister in Pakistan who was very warm towards India and clearly committed to improving the relationship, he said it right through his election campaign, which culminated in his victory last year in May. He said it just 10 days ago at a national security meeting when he said his greatest regret was the poor state of relations in India. That is the man we've embarrassed. And there's no likelihood that in this embattled position, he might be able to pick up the threads easily. So, have we achieved very much? I know you think that talking to Hurraiyat was wrong, but in the overreaction, as the critics say, we may have ended up with a worse situation because now Nawaz is embarrassed and he's a weak man and he may not want to reciprocate ever.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's a weak man. I've had good fortune to speak to him on some occasions, including at the Commonwealth Conference. And I agree that he has a commitment and a very, very strong and powerful commitment for better ties with India, a better relationship with India. I'm sorry, I wish that I had greater clarity about what our government intends to do. Our government is still finding its feet. I think they haven't articulated either before Parliament or otherwise in the public domain about what their position on Pakistan is. I think just a few handshakes and a few smiles and photo opportunities are not enough. We need to know a lot more that our government is willing to do, wants to do, and is committed to doing. And then, of course, one would be able to say, well, I expect that this is what will now happen. Okay. If you were to ask me what happens in September, I would say looks very difficult, but then going by past experience, somehow at the last minute they'll still manage to meet and again still be unstructured and still not go any further. Okay. So I think we need to do a lot more work at home and know our minds better.
I want to just make one point. Salman need not go very far. I would think that Mr. Modi's approach to Pakistan would be akin to that of Indira Gandhi.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
That's my hunch.
And what would that amount to?
I think that would amount to saying, yes, we need to have good relations. After all, she was the one who reinitiated
but what would that mean in terms of September and future dialogue?
Let's see how the circumstances play out. Look.
So we're on pause. We're on pause.
You say he has embarrassed Mr. Nawaz Sharif. Mr. Nawaz Sharif has embarrassed him by the behavior of his High Commissioner.
They've embarrassed each other.
No.
Which is even worse. Let me put something else to you. You know, you were defending what Mr. Modi did. You were arguing that there is a new man at the helm in India and Pakistan made a mistake not recognizing it, not acting accordingly. The opposite of that is the consequence we've ended up with. You've ended up embarrassing and weakening a Prime Minister in Pakistan who was genuinely committed to improving the relationship. We know that he faced a lot of internal opposition when he came in May. You heard Najam Sethi point out that he was in fact advised by his army, go back after dinner, don't have talks the next day, but he decided to stay on and walk the mile. Was it worth our while to embarrass that man over something that Pakistanis have been doing for 19 years, talking to Hurraiyat?
Karan, we have to conduct foreign policy to the best of India's interest. We are not here to worry about what Nawaz Sharif will feel or how about his position.
He's a strong Nawaz, not in our interest.
We have dealt with one of the worst anti-India elements in Pakistan.
No, but you're not answering my question. My question is this, Mr. Chari. Is India's interest not in maintaining a man like Nawaz and building on the possibility he offers us?
No. The question is, Pakistan has to put its own house into order. If they
would you prefer the army replace him? Because that's a growing likelihood.
No, the question is, if Nawaz Sharif really feels that he is being threatened by the army, he should have been doubly careful in not talking to Hurraiyat.
Musharraf was not too bad post 2004.
We have dealt with army, we have dealt with political parties, we have dealt with the clergy, we have dealt with everything in Pakistan, and now Pakistan, clergy, army, political, civil society, everybody should realize that they are dealing with a new India.
Krishnan Srinivasan, let me bring you in. As a former foreign secretary, you can see the state of impasse in the relationship between the two countries. Najam Sethi has made it crystal clear. The public opinion and very possibly the government is absolutely perplexed. They simply cannot understand What has happened and why? Because it goes so against the grain of what A, Mr. Modi was saying, and B, how Indian governments for 19 years have functioned. But given that our government still remains committed to improving the relationship, I imagine the onus is on us now to take the next step. If you were Foreign Secretary today, what advice would you give Mr. Modi to ensure that we don't just stall and there is still some momentum?
Well, let me just say also that I think the people of India and the government of India is entirely behind the Prime Minister in what has happened with the Foreign Secretary talks. Let me put that aside. But I would say now the best way forward would be, again, not to... I certainly agree that Sherpa work is necessary to come to any satisfactory outcome of a meeting of Prime Ministers. I certainly agree with that. But it depends on how that Sherpa work is done. I personally don't feel it can be done through normal bureaucratic channels. This is because the bureaucracies of both the countries, we always speak about the Pakistani military, but their civil service is also extremely blinkered when it comes to India. And I can't see that any outcome, positive outcome, could have come from these foreign secretary talks, except perhaps preparing an agenda which can be done.
In other words, what you're also saying as a corollary is that it's best the talks didn't happen, and this is a fortuitous outcome.
The best way forward would be for a special representative, fully empowered, of the Prime Minister to enter into discussions with a counterpart in Pakistan that has credibility on both sides of the border. I refer you to the Satinder Lamba talks, which had made considerable progress. I think this is the kind of mechanism.
All right, I want to stop you. I want to bring in Aziz Ahmed Khan, and I want to put you a different sort of problem before I take up the idea that maybe back channels and special representatives is the way forward. Before I do that, I want to put this to you. By making not meeting Hurraiyat the condition for future talks, because that is clearly now the condition, do you think Mr. Modi has set the bar so high that no government in Pakistan can agree to talks in the foreseeable future? Because quite clearly, the condition that will now apply is that when you agree to talks next time round, whenever that is, you can't meet Hurraiyat in advance.
You see, just a while back, one of your participants, I'm sorry I didn't get the name, mentioned about India's best interest and so on.
But answer my question.
When you are discussing bilateral...
Answer my question, Aziz. Let's not become rhetorical and talk to each other. Answer my question.
No,
By
no,
raising the bar so high, has Mr. Modi made a resumption of talks difficult?
I think they have dug a hole for themselves and they will have to get out of it. It is important that they do, because in any case Pakistan-India relations have been accident prone. There have been accidents in the past. We can always find a way to get out of it. I think the two sides should put their heads together and still move on, and I think September does offer an opportunity, and something should be done so that the two prime ministers can meet on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly
very quickly,
and work out a roadmap.
I'm interrupting you because I need to take a break, but before I do, I want to put a quick question to Najam Sethi, and the question is this, Najam Sethi: do you believe that any Pakistan government, and let's start by saying Mr. Nawaz Sharif in his present embattled state, could agree to not meeting Hurraiyat and accept the precondition Mr. Modi has set?
I think it's going to be very difficult. Nawaz already faced a lot of flack the last time round, but the government was able to cover its tracks by saying that this was a ceremonial occasion and they didn't want to get into controversial issues. However, let me just say one thing, Karan. My sense is that this whole crisis has been brought about by a misreading or a miscalculation by someone or the other in the Indian External Affairs Ministry. My sense is that somebody must have thought that Nawaz did not insist on meeting the Hurraiyat the last time round when he came here. This could be set as a precedent. So somebody said, let's tell the Pakistanis firmly that, let's stick to this new format.
That's not how the Indian...
And that if the Pakistanis agreed, this would be wonderful.
But
at the end of the day, the Pakistanis must have said, no, this is not going to be allowed to become a precedent. So I think there's been a miscalculation on the other side.
You have a foreign...
Sorry, we have... Sorry, let me disabuse you on this, please.
Very quickly.
Let me. Any future Prime Minister of Pakistan or an army chief or whoever it is in Pakistan, whatever dispensation, please take it very clear. You are talking to Government of India, official representatives of the Government of India. and no one else, period.
We have a star-studded panel of diplomats, experts and politicians from both sides of the border. As we come in literally to the last 7-8 minutes of this discussion, gentlemen, I want to raise with you a thought that ordinary people on both sides of the border are asking themselves. And I'm going to start with you, Najm Sethi. So often, when hopes are high, seemingly little and foolish things scupper the relationship, and they do it so easily, and they create such silly controversies. People ask themselves, do politicians on both sides lack the maturity to achieve lasting peace?
Hey, you know, my sense is it's not the politicians at all. When they're in opposition, they certainly want to create problems for the government in power, for their own government in power. But when they come to office, they want to move forward because they want to leave legacies. But my sense is that the establishment or the bureaucracy on both sides is trained not to resolve problems but to create problems, and to continue on this reciprocity and this tit for tat and give one, take one, that sort of argument. And that's their training. And so I think that's in a situation like India, Pakistan, my sense is it's the foreign offices of both countries that are part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
We have, in fact, foreign office spokesmen and former ambassadors from both countries with us. But before I come to them, I'm going to come to you, Salman Khurshid, and ask you a similar question about politicians. It requires a big, visionary politician to make peace. A man who has the capacity to think out of the box. Do we lack such politicians on both sides? Do we have people who are more concerned about consequences in terms of domestic political constituencies rather than thinking out of the box and reaching out?
Yeah, I think Karan, that's largely true. You need to be much larger than life to cut across the kind of problems India and Pakistan have had. There's no doubt about it. But unfortunately, there are groups in both countries who've survived on negative approach to the problem.
Okay.
And it's very difficult because they have a constituency. You can't say that they don't have a constituency, and it's very difficult for anyone to handle it unless someone decides that this is the last thing I'm going to do, and then I'll just walk away into the sunset.
Krishnan Srinivasan, you're a former foreign secretary. You spent an entire career in the foreign office. Does the mindset of South Bloc in India, the received conventional way of doing things, the bureaucratic approach, to use Najm Sethi's language, become a hindrance when politicians want to break the mold? Is the bureaucracy or the foreign service the drag factor?
Well, I think I'd agree with Mr. Sethi. I think it's on both sides of the border. I don't think anything really can be expected from the bureaucracies of both countries. It's not entirely their fault. It's because they've been brought up to take a rather negative view of the other country. I do have, though, much more confidence in the future than apparently the others do. I think that we've been through all this before several times, and what is new in the game is Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi. I think that if we accept for the moment that he does wish to have better relations with Pakistan and is determined to do so,
okay,
I think that there will be opportunities in future, not through the bureaucratic ranks, but through the political ranks, and I've suggested a mechanism already.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. You're saying your faith in the future rests in your belief that Mr. Modi is capable of doing something that others haven't done. I'll underline for the audience, that is still your personal opinion. It's not proven by anything Mr. Modi has so far done. But I'm going to go back to Aziz Ahmed Khan and pick up on that earlier point about the bureaucracy. Krishnan Srinivasan readily accepted that South Bloc can be a drag. Can your foreign office equally hold back someone like Nawaz Sharif who wants to try and break the mold? Would you be equally honest?
Well, I will very honestly tell you, just look back to the last 10 years. Pakistani politicians, leaders have taken initiatives, have done out-of-the-box thinking, and they have had full support from the Pakistani Foreign Office. You saw us performing in Delhi also as representatives of the government of Pakistan. You have seen several foreign secretaries who have come and visited India. The way they have pushed forward the agenda set by the leaders, I don't think that as far as Pakistan is concerned, the Foreign Office has been a block. We are not the blocking block, but pushing things forward.
You know, I'm going to come to Mr. Chari last because you speak in a sense as a member of the BJP, although you're speaking as a strategic expert, not necessarily as a party man, but you still speak for Mr. Modi, so I'm going to come to you last. I want to put this to you. Krishnan Srinivasan believes that Mr. Modi represents the first real credible hope for the future and change in this relationship. I pointed out to him that in fact there's nothing Mr. Modi's done to justify it. Can you counter that?
Well, if it took Nixon to make friends with Mao, it would take Mr. Modi to make friends with Pakistan. But let me say this, it takes two to tango. And the problem with difference between India and Pakistan, I've known their foreign office too well. Too many of them don't take their orders from the political establishment, but from GHQ, from the army. And that's the real problem with the functioning of the Pakistan Foreign Office.
Let me put this to you. We're talking about Mr. Modi, as Krishnan Srinivasan said, being the great hope for the future. A man who has the capacity to be visionary, has the capacity to be accommodating of a fellow Prime Minister's problems. Mr. Modi drew surprise new red lines rather than be accommodating. And he could have been, because clearly at this moment Nawaz is embattled and weak. Mr. Modi is strong. It would have been magnanimity. Instead, Mr. Modi, many people would say, became petty.
You know, all these large-heartedness on both the sides of the border, what has it produced? Could you have got a person more large-hearted than Manmohan Singh or Vajpayee or I.K. Gujral? And if that could not produce anything, I think dealing with Pakistan in a very strict manner and drawing the red lines will prove. And we wanted to give an opportunity to Nawaz Sharif to really prove his point. Unfortunately, he has failed the test.
Do you want to quickly, before we run out of time, answer that? Large-heartedness has not worked. Drawing red lines and dealing straight is going to produce results. A quick answer, because then I'll end the show. Najam Sethi, did you hear me?
No, I can't hear you.
Aziz, do you want to answer that question? Najam's line has gone. Do you want to answer that?
Let's just look back who has shown large-heartedness and who has not. Who has moved forward? Pakistan has reciprocated all the time. We have come to certain agreements and then we have not implemented those agreements.
All right.
I think it is time to sit back, look at things and see whether we can move forward or not. And I can assure you that across the board in Pakistan, there is consensus that we should move forward with India.
All right, let's hope that's true. But the sad part is, as we come to the end of this show, we're tipping back into the rancor that actually characterizes the relationship between our two countries. We're brothers, we speak one language, we have the same curse words, we have the same jokes, but we can't seem to agree on the problems that divide us or a solution for them. And I suspect that many people will say at the end of the day, we're little men and our politicians are little people, and that's why the problems between us grow bigger and bigger. Well, it's a sad point at which to end, but my thanks to all my guests for joining me. Goodbye. Good night.